And a warm welcome to the programme from me, David Foster. Algorithms, we've heard a bit about them lately, haven't we? Well, they can help us to decide what to watch next. They can predict romantic compatibility. They can be designed to catch benefit fraudsters, tell military planners how to fight battles, and so on and so on. But what happens when we effectively remove humans from helping the human race? This is Roundtable. Algorithms we've recently seen got it very wrong indeed in guessing the grades that pupils in the UK should be awarded when they hadn't been able to sit actual exams. We may only now be seeing just how dangerous it is to trust machines rather than mankind.
Trust our teachers!
When their futures were thrown into doubt by an algorithm, school pupils in the UK were furious and came onto the streets to force a government climb down. They'd been unable to sit exams during the pandemic, and a computer formula was applied to all students' estimated grades. It would have resulted in 40% of grades being lowered and more pupils from poorer backgrounds losing out, but it was scrapped. Of course, algorithms are all around us, deciding what we see on our social media feed, how much our car insurance will cost us, or ranking our internet search results, and most of the time they work without attracting much notice. But some experts say we should be paying close attention to how algorithms are being used. The UK government was applying one to decide on visa applications until a legal challenge accused it of racism and the algorithm was dropped. There's little doubt that algorithms are a powerful tool that help us get things done faster and usually better. But how can we make sure they're used fairly and are trusted by citizens and consumers?
The doors have been locked, the pupils have been assembled, let the examination begin. Actually, I should say the teachers are assembled, because joining us on Roundtable, these are experts: Amani Albana, Reader in Information Systems, Royal Holloway, University of London; Tom Haynes, Lecturer in Machine Learning at the University of Bath; and in London, Priya Lakhani, Founder and Chief Exec of Century Tech, which uses artificial intelligence in its educational software. And she will tell you very vehemently that what she has at her disposal had nothing to do with the algorithms and the A-level fiasco. So you'll tell us what it is in just a moment, Priya, if we may. But I mean, I suppose what we've got to look at with this is that trust, complete trust has gone in the system, no matter whether it's A-levels or something else.
That's absolutely right. And that's a huge problem. I think in the introduction, we talked about relying on machines and not humans, but actually this was a human problem. It was humans who decided on a formula and applied a formula that had essential bias to it. And now, obviously, it's quite right for the public to look at this debacle, look at what's happened and said, well, how can we stop this from happening again? But at the same time, when AI can do so much good in the world, when using statistical models can save us time, it can make us work more effectively, there is a huge amount of public trust that has essentially been damaged, which is such a shame. And this really should never have been allowed to happen in the first place.
Is it the same with every type of algorithm? Because even the simplest ones, apparently the simple one about a recipe is an algorithm. And you can go back to 1600 BC, etc., and find the very first algorithm. Is it the same with all of them, that they are only as good as the program information that they're given?
That's you've hit the nail on the head there, David. It's the best question to ask. So actually what they applied was a formula. You can call this, an algorithm if you want to. And it really is about the fact that a human will first program the algorithm. A human will decide what steps and what sequence this algorithm takes. When a human does that, the human has to then look at, what are the steps? Is there bias? Is there discrimination? I think any of us, if we'd seen this algorithm prior to it being used against students, we would have seen, how could you possibly include past performance of a school? Because that has bias within it. But it is about the human. You don't have output without the original input. So that input is absolutely crucial. And we have to look at now the ethical standards as we move forward as to algorithms that are applied for public services and public goods.
You see, I'm wondering, and this could be either for either of the two of you who haven't spoken so far. Let's go to Tom first of all. I'm wondering whether they are all actually inevitably flawed, because the educational algorithm doesn't know Billy Brilliant from David Dunderhead here.
In the case of the education algorithm, yeah, you could make the observation that the very problem was flawed. You can't approximate or guess someone's exam results without them really providing at least some evidence. And they had nothing. They had no exams, they had no coursework, they didn't even have mocks across the board. So it was at some level an impossible problem. But that's not to say that they came up with the best solution. They came up with a pretty bad solution, to put it mildly.
But why did it go so very wrong?
If I was to break it down, it failed at many levels. So there were basic technical mistakes. They misunderstood what the implications of the maths they used were. There was some kind of communication issue between the people doing the work and the upper management, who clearly were not aware of the problems they had created. When, if you look at the report, they clearly had done measurements and they had determined that there were problems. And finally, at the very top level, rules are being set for the development of the algorithm which were incompatible with what we would expect. And the going back, one of those rules was clearly that the past school performance had to be used.
See, I'm wondering here whether we go, Amani, let's bring you in and go back to the simplest of recipes and forward to the most complex of calculations, like when there is an incoming missile strike and when, therefore, to launch your own missiles in retaliation. That unless the person who's made this thing is an absolute genius, these things are inevitably going to be flawed.
Yes, as long as we are using social data, we need to be very careful. So social data has its own characteristics. It comes with particular bias. So we are dealing with, already the data we are relying on is a biased data. So to start training the algorithm or the computer on biased data already, it will continue to produce more bias for the future. What we need to do, we need to look at data. We need to look at the social meaning of data, what biases that this data hold already, and how we can neutralize this data. So when we apply an algorithm, we are trying to reduce this bias as much as possible.
But we might be better off, therefore, without them.
I wouldn't go that far to say that we are better off without them, but we have duty and we have responsibility to improve algorithms and to improve algorithmic decision making. Yes, it's a long journey and it is not going to happen overnight, but we should learn and we should improve and we should try in the future to develop trusted algorithms.
You see, I'm wondering if we're only using them. Priya, I think you wanted to come in, but bear with me while I ask this question. If we're only using them because they are so rapid and therefore they are a shortcut, that we would get there in the end with a correct answer if they didn't exist, it just might take a very long time.
You've got to the heart of it. It's why are we using them, right? In my view, and I've been building an AI in education now for many years, there was no reason to use an algorithm in this context. And the simple reason is that we have 500,000 teachers in this country. Yes, they were worried about grade inflation. That was the issue why they raised this, algorithm in the first place, right? They were worried about teachers inflating grades. But the fact is from when you went to school, I know when I went to school, and every single viewer of this program knows that when they went to school, there were individual stories in every single classroom in the world. And those individual stories will never be heard. Those outliers will never be recognized with a bog standard, straight applied algorithm. This was not a good use case for an algorithm. There are lots of algorithms. You talked about recipes, you talked about cybersecurity. There are lots and lots of areas where algorithms are appropriate. They make our decisions better, right? They make them faster. And there are lots of great times when we can use these algorithms for benefit. In education, for example, personalized learning. But when you're talking about summative high stakes assessment, you're talking about an assessment that students take and their opportunity is significantly affected by the outcome of that particular summative assessment. The only way in which technology ought to be used is to actually take that summative assessment potentially online or on technology.
Yeah, and we're talking specifically about education here, but of course it's across the board. And I want to take a point that you made and go back to Tom and then also to Amani. You said there are situations where it's appropriate to use algorithms. My question is, Tom, appropriate or essential?
There are certainly situations where it is impossible to get human beings to solve the problem.
Give us an example. Give me an example.
Say content moderation on Facebook. They have rooms of people and they have a very high burnout rate because they see stuff that no human should see. These kinds of problems. There are also problems where speed matters. There is an algorithm inside your car choosing when to fire the spark plugs. No human being can react that quickly. The problem is when you put essentially money over people. As long as you focus on the cost saving and not how does this make someone's life better, that's where the problems come in. And so many algorithms, they make people's lives better and easier.
Can I just sort of clarify this one? You're saying when it comes to the car and the spark plugs, that even my granddad's old banger back in 1925 or whatever it was had an algorithm because it was simply a number of steps that had to be followed to make a procedure happen.
At some level, yes. It was purely mechanical back then. It was all wired up mechanically. These days, there's a microprocessor that is running an algorithm and fine-tuning the timing depending on what you're doing in the car at that exact moment.
Amani, how do we get trust back?
Well, I think that we need to reconsider how we develop these type of algorithms. And I think that it's from my research, I see that debate and consultation about what is the algorithm, the parameters of the algorithm do help in both explainability, understanding of the algorithm, but also in the decision making, what goes into the algorithm and what should not go into the algorithm. So these should be available for public debate, particularly when we are doing algorithms for decision making in public policies or in the public sector and in government.
But you know, I can see I can see a problem with that because, as we've already said, there are so many different algorithms you don't even know what they are. That some kind of public consultation is going to be pretty much impossible, except on maybe the major ones like immigration, etc., etc.
When we develop a software in government, there are procedures and there is a process, very good process of quality control. And because algorithms is a new technology, we do not have similar procedures. So what we need now, we need to have a mechanism to audit algorithms. We need to have mechanisms to develop algorithms to test them properly as well.
So we should get an algorithm to test an algorithm. Priya, sorry, you want to say something serious?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a short-term, a medium and a long-term strategy here. The short-term is apologising for what's happened, correcting it, and also, just working on some sort of independent body within each country. Ideally, there'd be a global body because we know technology is global, and the body doesn't get ignored. Here, there were experts saying there is a problem with this algorithm before it was released, and they were ignored. That can't be allowed to happen. The medium to long-term strategy is actually consumers, right? I don't think consumers are going to be sitting there deciphering algorithms. That's really, really difficult to do. I don't even think consumers know the difference between a formula, an algorithm, artificial intelligence, and the rest of it. But what consumers do need to be able to do is we need to educate them in a very basic, sort of simple way, and start with, kids at school as they grow up, as to what is actually behind this program, whether it's a program they shop with, they find hotels with, they buy their groceries with, what's happening behind this program in plain, simple language. If people can understand the apps that are on their mobile phones that they use every single day and how they work, they will be able to ask more discerning questions of technology that is then presented to them. That's a long-term strategy. But we need to invest in that now, David, because if we don't, when's the starting point? And it feels very much like that question is constantly not being answered by governments around the world. There is no investment in education in that sense, and that's something that I'm really passionate to lobby for.
Well, I wonder if we would be discussing it on this programme if it hadn't actually happened just in the near future, in the present circumstances. So, yes, in terms of public education, something is way behind at the moment. Joanna Redden, you may know Joanna Redden, Dr. Joanna Redden, Data Justice Lab, had this to say. Let's discuss this. We are finding that the situation experienced here with education, in other words, the A-level fiasco, is not unique. Algorithmic and predictive decision systems are leading to a wide range of harms globally, and also that a number of government bodies across different countries are pausing or cancelling their use of these kinds of system. A wide range of harms globally, Tom.
Yeah, you can actually go all the way back to the 1960s and find, I'm going to mispronounce this, the Firac 60 machine, which, due to an algorithm failure, killed some people. There are countless examples.
What actually happened?
So essentially, this was a cancer treatment device that gave a radiation dosage, and due to a bug, it would sometimes not put the shielding in place, which would mean the person would get a full whack of radiation, which was in some cases fatal.
Continue.
And that's an old case.
Yeah.
These days, we've got far more power put in the hands of these algorithms. They are molding our media landscape. They are molding every moment of our lives, from mortgages to banking to how the cars around us are designed, how the streets are designed. Everything is being touched by algorithms. They've gained this massive power, but we still haven't caught up in the responsibility aspect.
Okay, this is one for all three of you, but I'll come to you, Amani, first of all. If they are simply failing because of human error in terms of input, could they not also fail and be dangerous, as Thomas suggested, but in a sort of a deliberate way if they were put in the hands of the wrong people? They could be used against humankind.
Well, any computer system could be used against humankind. So regardless of whether this is algorithmic based on machine learning or artificial intelligence, or it is a simple computer system. So, of course, there is always risks in the use of computers. There is a lot of cybersecurity issues as well, etc. So this is not an issue that is specific to algorithms. What is specific to algorithms is the use of data and is the use of history and the role of both in the development of the future. So are we looking our future in the past? This is an important question, I think, and I think that this is a good time for us to discuss the role of history and the role of data in the development of future decisions.
You're talking about the fact that we collect information and look at it subjectively in terms of history. I'm sorry, I sort of missed the point, I think.
Okay, so basically for algorithms to work properly, you need to include elements of historical data. So for example, for an algorithm to develop to understand and to classify and diagnose patients with cancer, we need to let the machine learn how cancer patients scans will look like based on historical data.
Oh, you mean simply what has happened to this patient in the past? You're not talking about the Battle of Hastings or something like that?
No, literally what is happening in the past. So if I am hiring, for example, and this company, for example, had never hired a female before, the probability is the algorithm will never select a woman to be recruited, because this is based on historical data, so it will continue the trajectory.
Okay, you other guys, Priya, Tom, do you want to come in on that point?
Look, there's algorithms and formulae for good in the majority of cases. There's AI for good in health, in education, and there are some quite obvious examples of that, right? And we were talking about, diagnosing cancer, but there are always going to be some bad actors. And there have been in every sort of technological pursuit and innovation that we've had since the beginning of time. So there needs to be regulation in the sector. There needs to be accountability. And David, to your point, when you said we need to look at the algorithms, you need to look at the humans behind the algorithms. So we need to get really serious about what is actually happening, behind these technologies. Where is the regulation? Because this is the biggest threat, I think, to humankind. I know we're talking about pandemics and crises, and that's very topical at the moment, but this will be it in the future. So that's what we need to do.
What sort of regulations?
Well, so this is the big question. It's so difficult when you've got so many different countries at play. Technology can penetrate, different countries even without sort of intending to. Regulation means some sort of body. Unfortunately, for innovators like myself, that can often mean slowing us down a little bit. That's okay. It's about oversight and accountability. Regulation is very much about, here are essentially the ethical principles behind building technology. This is bias. This is discrimination. Let's look at companies that are using data science, not just AI, but data science, algorithms, formulae, all the way into sort of artificial intelligence. Are they then abiding by these sets of rules that we consider to have essentially like a global kite mark? And if not, there are consequences. And we've seen that with the press. We have press all over the world. We have sort of media regulation. We've got regulation in all other sectors. Isn't this just as important? And aren't we supposed to learn from this debacle that's just happened?
Yeah, and I know you think there should be some kind of ethical review, I believe, Tom.
Oh, certainly. Going back to the point regarding the potential sexism of never hiring a woman, that almost happened to a company. I won't give their name. But they spotted it and they never deployed it. They got lucky. We need to stop getting lucky, and we need to make this testing and verification very much part of the process. We need to acknowledge that when we're building systems that will affect people's lives, there has to be testing, there has to be validation. It also has to be continuous throughout the lifetime of a product or a project. You have to keep checking it. To use a bridge as an analogy, the architects who design the bridge, they run many tests to make sure it doesn't fall down, but then it gets checked repeatedly during use. Is this bridge going to continue to stay up? Is this bridge still safe?
But you are talking about things other than mechanical engineering, where there are things that are right or wrong. The bridge is going to fall down or it's going to rust prematurely. But what you've got, I'll come to you in just a moment, Priya, but what you've got here is a whole host of subjective human elements deciding what is right and what is wrong to put into this. And therefore you could never have, I would suggest, an objective view of what is right or what is wrong.
Yeah, I'd agree with that statement. We can, however, have a conversation within society as to what we would consider to be acceptable, and at least filter out where we are outside that domain.
Actually, I was just intrigued when you were talking about objective decision making. I think that we have to be realistic about decision making process. Decision making process has never been 100% objective, and so to look at the ultimate objectivity, I think this would be very utopic. We want to find acceptable decision making based on acceptable criteria. And this is what has happened in societies all the way through. So whether we are using algorithm or we are using people are taking the decision, we agree on particular criteria. And we agree that when somebody's not happy with a decision, there is a route for people to object these decisions. And I think that what is happening now, because this is a new technology, we need to find a mechanism for this process. So it is an innovation process where we create the technology, and now we can see the problems, and now we need to rectify these problems.
Okay, Priya, sorry, I did say I'd talk to you in just a second. It's been a couple of minutes. Go on.
No, not a problem. No, I think what the panel's all been talking about is it's really about, if we think about how we train our algorithms, it's about that training data that we're talking about. So I think there are actually a set of very simple questions that one could ask. Companies, organizations building algorithms, in building that data that trains this future algorithm, are there any questions where there is an element of bias or discrimination? There are very, very simple questions one could ask, right? And if we answer those questions, I think we can either, companies could publish that, for example, and you could be aware as a consumer, as a user of that product or service, if there is any risk in the way that algorithm is created. I don't think that this is really that difficult. And your idea of an objective data set, actually, I think that that's the holy grail in many cases. We look at historical data, of course, to learn from it. And you can see from a medical standpoint, that would be very, very important. But you can start to see that in the A-level debacle, looking at historical data of schools brings bias. It doesn't educate actually the algorithm, given the outliers and the personal nature of education. So I don't think it takes a lot actually to ask these questions. I just think this is it. The damage has been done.
Okay, quickie, if you don't mind here, and I'll end with Priya on this one. Even if they made the perfect algorithm now to determine exam results in the UK, would anybody ever trust it again?
I wouldn't, because there is no perfect algorithm. Every individual, every student is personal and individual, and this should not happen again. It just shouldn't be applied.
Thank you very, very much indeed. Your results will be arriving in the post. I can't promise you when because of the special circumstances in which we live. At least that's what every delivery company has said to me over the last 4 months. I thank you personally for being on the programme, and I thank you wherever you happen to be for watching this edition of Round Table. Pretty much everything we do these days, we have learned, is governed by an algorithm. For now, goodbye.